Jake had been a soldier for years, traveling across many planets, facing many enemies. But nothing could have prepared him for the attack that happened on that fateful day. He was on a routine mission, heading toward an uncharted planet in the far reaches of the galaxy. His ship, the Falcon, was small but strong, built for quick jumps across the galaxy. It was supposed to be an easy trip, but it turned into a nightmare. Without warning, a massive alien fleet appeared out of nowhere. Their ships were dark and sleek, the kind Jake had only heard about in old war stories. The ships of the Xylar Empire. He had read about them in the training manuals, but no one had ever seen them up close. The Xylars were feared across the galaxy. Their queen was said to be as cold as ice, and her empire was known for its ruthlessness. Jake's ship didn't stand a chance. The Falcon was shot down almost immediately. He was knocked unconscious as the ship exploded around him, and when he came to, he found himself in a cold, dark cell aboard the Xylar flagship. The walls were metallic, and the air smelled of something unfamiliar. The quiet hum of the ship was the only sound, but it was enough to make Jake's skin crawl. He didn't know how long he had been unconscious. Hours, maybe days. He didn't know. The last thing he remembered was trying to send a distress signal before the ship was hit. But now, it didn't matter. He was alive barely and a prisoner of the Xylars. A soft hiss from the door interrupted his thoughts. The door slid open, and two tall, armored figures entered. They were Xylar soldiers, tall and imposing, their dark armor reflecting the dim light. One of them stepped forward, motioning for Jake to stand. "Get up," the soldier commanded in a cold, emotionless voice. Jake didn't resist. He had learned a long time ago that resisting in situations like this only made things worse. He stood slowly, his legs feeling weak beneath him. The soldier grabbed his arm and yanked him forward. Jake was led down a narrow hallway, the sound of his boots echoing against the cold metal floor. He was brought to a large chamber, the walls adorned with strange, glowing symbols Jake didn't recognize. At the far end of the room stood a throne, and upon it sat the Xylar queen, Alara. She was taller than most of the Xylars, with a regal presence that made the room feel even colder. Her skin was a deep shade of violet, and her eyes glowed with an unnatural light. Her hair, silver and flowing, moved as if it had a life of its own, as though it was floating around her. She wore a crown, black and sharp, that matched the rest of her dark armor. Jake couldn't help but stare at her. She was beautiful, in a way that was almost terrifying. But it wasn't just her appearance that made her stand out, it was the aura of power that surrounded her. The stories he had heard about her were true. She was the queen of an empire that had conquered countless worlds. Alara's gaze was fixed on him, piercing and unblinking. There was no emotion in her eyes, just coldness. "Human," she spoke, her voice echoing through the chamber. It was low and commanding, yet oddly calm. "You are the first of your kind to enter our domain in many years." Jake stood still, unsure of how to respond. He had faced enemies before, but nothing like this. The Xylars were different. They didn't kill for sport. They had a reason for everything, and Jake didn't know what that reason was. "I should kill you," Alara continued, her words cutting through the silence like a blade. "You are a threat to my empire, a threat to everything we have built." But she paused, her eyes narrowing. "But I will not yet." Jake's heart raced. Was this some sort of trick? Was she toying with him, or did she have some other plan? He didn't know what to think, but he couldn't stay silent. "Why?" he asked, his voice hoarse from the dust and the uncertainty of the situation. "Why haven't you killed me?" The question hung in the air, and for a moment, Alara didn't answer. She simply stared at him, her face unreadable. Jake's mind raced. Was this the end? Was she going to kill him slowly, or was she waiting for something, testing him? He had to know. There was too much at stake. Alara slowly stood from her throne, her steps silent, almost ghost-like. She moved with the grace of a predator, and for a moment, Jake thought she might strike him downright. But she didn't. Instead, she came closer and spoke again. "Humans are a curious species," she said, her voice still calm. "You fight for survival. You fight for your people. I've seen it before in your kind, over and over again. The galaxy fears you, even if they won't admit it. Jake's confusion deepened. What are you talking about? What does any of that have to do with me? Alara looked at him with something Jake couldn't quite place. Was it pity? No. It was something else, something almost like recognition. You're kind, she said softly. Reminds me of something I haven't seen in my empire for centuries. Jake was still trying to piece everything together when Alara's voice grew colder, her gaze sharp. You ask why I haven't killed you, human, she said, and the answer is simple. You remind me of me. Jake's eyes widened. What? Alara smiled, but it wasn't the smile of kindness. It was the smile of someone who had seen too much, someone who understood the weight of survival. You are a survivor, just as I am, she said. That's why I spared you? Jake didn't know what to think. This wasn't the answer he had expected. The queen, the ruthless leader of an empire, was telling him that she spared him because they were alike. It didn't make sense. Before he could respond, Alara turned her back to him, returning to her throne. But don't get any ideas, human. Just because I spared your life doesn't mean I won't end it if I see fit. Jake stood there, still stunned. His life was in her hands, and for the first time, he realized that he wasn't just a prisoner, he was something more to the queen. But what exactly? He couldn't yet understand. As Alara sat back down on her throne, Jake couldn't help but wonder if his life would ever be the same again. The story of how he survived the Xylar Empire had just begun. Jake was left standing in front of Queen Alara's throne, still trying to process everything that had just happened. Her words kept echoing in his mind. You remind me of me. It was strange, almost impossible to believe. How could he, simple human soldier, remind the queen of herself? What was going on here? Alara hadn't spoken much after that. She had ordered her soldiers to escort Jake back to the cell, which was no more than a small, cold room with a steel bed and little else. The walls were thick and gray, the air stale. Nothing about it was comforting. Yet, Jake couldn't stop thinking about her words. Hours passed, or maybe it was days. Time had become an empty concept since he was brought aboard the alien ship. He couldn't know for sure. The only thing that was clear was the quiet and almost unbearable silence that seemed to settle over him in that dark room. He had seen many horrors during his time in space, but nothing compared to the coldness of the Xylar Empire. The stories he had heard about them before his mission now seemed mild to understated. These aliens were not just conquerors, they were rulers without mercy. And yet, here he was, alive. Alive when every other prisoner would have been killed instantly. Jake lay on the steel bed, staring at the ceiling, his mind still racing. What was it that made Alara spare him? He had no answers, only questions. The door to his cell suddenly slid open, breaking the silence. He stood up quickly, his heart racing. But it wasn't one of the Xylar soldiers who walked in. It was Alara herself. She stepped inside without saying a word, her eyes fixed on him. She didn't seem to notice the confusion or surprise on his face. She was as calm and composed as ever, her presence overwhelming the small space. You've been thinking, she said, her voice smooth and measured. I can see it in your eyes. Jake didn't respond immediately. He wasn't sure what to say. He was still trying to wrap his mind around everything that had happened. Instead, he simply nodded. Alara took a step closer, her eyes narrowing slightly as she observed him. You want to know why I didn't kill you, don't you? She asked, her voice almost a whisper. Jake hesitated for a moment, but then he nodded again. Yes, he said, his voice low but steady. I don't understand. Why am I still here? Why are you treating me differently from the others? Alara didn't answer right away. She simply stared at him, as if weighing his words carefully. Finally, she spoke. It's because you are different, she said softly. I've seen many soldiers like you, brave, strong, determined. But you, she paused and looked at him more closely. You have something that they don't. Jake frowned, still unsure of what she meant. What do you mean? What do I have that they don't? Alara's gaze softened for a moment, but her next words were sharp and direct. You have the will to survive. You don't just fight for yourself, you fight for something greater. You fight for your people. Jake was silent. He had never thought of himself as anything special. He had always been just another soldier doing his job, following orders. But here was the queen, the ruler of an entire empire, telling him that what set him apart was his desire to protect others. You see that in me? He asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Alara nodded. Yes, and that's why I didn't kill you. You are a survivor, and I respect that. But don't mistake my respect for weakness. I will not hesitate to end your life if you become a threat. Jake stood there, trying to make sense of it all. He had been expecting her to break him, to crush his spirit with fear. But instead, she had given him something that he didn't understand, a chance to survive. Alara seemed to sense his confusion, and she smiled, though it wasn't a warm smile. It was calculating, like a chess player making a move. You're wondering why I told you this. You think you should be dead by now. You think I should have killed you when I had the chance. Jake swallowed hard, nodding. I thought that was what you would do. It's what any other empire would do. It's what I would have expected. Alara's eyes gleamed, and she took a step back, raising her hand as if to dismiss him. But I'm not like the others. I don't need to kill you. I don't need to destroy everything in my path. I have more important things to do. Like what? Jake asked, now more curious than ever. He couldn't figure out where this conversation was going, but something about it felt like a turning point. Alara didn't answer immediately. Instead, she glanced out the small window of the cell, staring into the distance, as if she were thinking about something far away. Like survival, she said after a long pause. Like saving my people. You see, my empire is falling apart. We are losing the war. And I need someone like you to help us. To help me, Jake blinked, not sure if he had heard her correctly. Help you? You want my help? Yes, she replied, turning back to face him. I want your help. But not in the way you think. I don't need you to fight. Not yet, at least. What I need is someone who understands what it means to survive. Someone who understands what it means to lose everything. Jake felt his chest tighten. He had heard stories about empires falling, about rulers losing everything, but he had never imagined he would be standing in front of one of those rulers. You're asking me to help you? Jake repeated, his voice still in disbelief. Alara's expression softened for the briefest of moments. Yes, but be warned, human, if you refuse, I will not hesitate to destroy you. But if you accept, if you agree to help me save my people, there could be something in it for you. Jake didn't know what to say. What could he say? He was a prisoner, not a negotiator. He wasn't in a position to make demands. But something about Alara's words struck him. This wasn't just about survival anymore. This was about something bigger, and for the first time, Jake realized that his fate wasn't entirely in his hands. He had a choice, and that choice could change everything. Jake stood frozen for a moment, staring at Alara, the alien queen who had just offered him a choice. His mind was spinning. A choice? He had never imagined such a thing. In all his years of training and fighting, survival was always a matter of obeying orders. It was never about making deals, never about being given a choice. But here he was, standing before the queen of an empire, being offered something he didn't fully understand. Alara's gaze remained steady, and she didn't speak for a few moments. As if waiting for him to process her words, Jake was struggling to do just that. She wasn't threatening him anymore, not in the way he expected. No, she was offering him something else, something unexpected. You're asking for my help, Jake said again, the words finally sinking in. It was still hard for him to believe. He had been trained to fight the Xylers, not to help them. Alara nodded slowly, her expression unreadable. Yes, she said, her voice calm but firm. You are a soldier. I can see it in you. But you are also more than just a fighter. You have a survival instinct, a drive to protect your people. That is what I need. Jake clenched his fists at his sides, trying to understand. You want me to help you fight against your enemies? He asked, his voice low. Alara's eyes flashed with something sharp, like a predator assessing its prey. Not exactly, she replied. I do not need more soldiers. What I need is someone who can understand strategy, someone who can think beyond brute force. My empire is at war, but it is not just a war for land. It is a war for survival. My people are losing, and if we continue down this path, we will be wiped out. Jake's mind raced. He had always seen the Xylers as enemies that needed to be defeated, not as a species struggling to survive. His training had taught him to fight for humanity, to protect Earth from alien threats. But here was Alara telling him that her people were at risk, that they were not the invincible force he had been taught to fear. But why me? Jake asked, his voice filled with doubt. Why would you trust me? I'm a human. I'm your enemy. Alara stepped closer, her voice quieter now. You are not just a human. You are someone who knows what it means to lose. You fight for survival, just as I do. You understand the cost of war, and that is why I need you. Jake took a deep breath, trying to calm the storm of thoughts inside his head. This wasn't the situation he had imagined. He had expected torture, perhaps even death. But now he was being asked to help the queen of the Xyler Empire. The same empire that had destroyed countless worlds, the same empire that had taken his ship down. Why should I help you? He asked. Why should I risk my life for you, for your people? Alara's expression softened slightly, though there was still a hard edge to her features. Because you are a soldier, and you understand the value of what I am asking. I am not asking you to join my empire. I am not asking you to fight for me. I am asking you to help me save my people, and in return, I will spare you. I will ensure that you survive. Jake felt a cold chill run down his spine. Was this a trick, a manipulation? Or was Alara truly asking for help, a genuine plea for survival? He wasn't sure, but one thing was clear. The queen wasn't like the enemy he had imagined. She wasn't a monster, not in the way he had been taught to think. She was a ruler, a leader, someone struggling to save her people from destruction. I don't know if I can trust you, Jake admitted, his voice quieter now. But the tension in the room was thick. You've destroyed so many worlds, so many lives. Why should I believe that you won't just use me and then throw me away? Alara's gaze was sharp, but there was no anger in her eyes. Only the cool calculation of someone who had seen too much. I can't change the past, she said. But I can change the future, and that is why I need your help. You see, this war is not what it seems. We have made enemies, and we have done things that I regret. But now, I need to make decisions that will shape the future of my people. If I don't, we will be destroyed. Jake's mind was racing. Alara's words weren't just an empty promise. There was a weight behind them, a truth that he couldn't ignore. The Xylers were losing, and they were desperate. But why did she think he could help? He wasn't a strategist. He wasn't a diplomat. He was just a soldier. A man who had fought to protect his people, not to save an alien empire. What do you want me to do? Jake finally asked, his voice steady, but full of uncertainty. What do you need from me? Alara's eyes locked onto his, and for the first time, Jake saw a flicker of something other than cold calculation. There was a hint of hope in her gaze, a quiet plea that she didn't voice aloud. I need you to help me find a way to end this war, she said softly. I need you to help me broker peace. My people are at war with many other species, and I cannot fight them all. The Xyler Empire is vast, but we are crumbling. I need someone who can think differently, someone who can find a way to end the fighting without more bloodshed. I don't want to conquer, I want to survive, and for that, I need you. Jake was silent, his mind working through the options, the possibilities. He didn't know if he could trust her, but he knew one thing. The future of both their peoples was at stake. If he didn't act, if he didn't take a chance, there might be nothing left to save. I'll help you, Jake said finally, his voice filled with resolve. But you need to understand I'm doing this for my people. Not for you, not for your empire. I'm doing this to make sure no one else suffers. Alara nodded, a small, almost imperceptible smile forming on her lips. I understand, human. And I will do whatever it takes to ensure that this peace benefits you as well. Jake wasn't sure what he was getting himself into, but he knew he couldn't walk away now. The Xylar Empire had already shown him that they weren't the monsters he had imagined, and maybe, just maybe, he could help them find a way to survive. But the road ahead wouldn't be easy, and Jake wasn't sure if he could trust the Queen still. The offer of peace was too important to ignore. He turned toward her, meeting her gaze with steady determination. "What's the first step?" Alara's eyes glinted, and for the first time since they had met, she looked almost hopeful. "The first step," she said, "is to stop the fighting, and I will need you by my side to make it happen." Jake took a deep breath. This was just the beginning. The quiet hum of the Xylar flagship surrounded Jake as he followed Alara through the dark corridors. His mind was still processing everything that had happened. The strange alliance he had just agreed to, and the strange queen who had offered him a chance to help save her empire. Nothing in his military training had prepared him for this. The plan was simple, or at least it seemed so. Jake had agreed to help Alara, but he didn't know exactly what that meant. She had told him that her empire was on the brink of collapse, and that her people were losing the war. But what could he do to stop it? What could one human soldier do to change the fate of an entire empire? Alara led him into a large war room, its walls lined with star maps and holographic displays of the galaxy. The room was filled with Xylar officers, each standing at attention as their queen entered. They didn't look at Jake, but he could feel their eyes on him, their judgment lingering in the air. Alara took her place at the head of the room, and the officers immediately began discussing the current state of the war. Jake stood silently at the back, watching and listening as they argued over battle plans and military strategies. He had no experience with this kind of warfare, but he understood one thing: Alara's people were desperate. After a few minutes, Alara turned to him, her expression serious. "You're here to help me. I'll need your insights. Human, you're the outsider. You can see things differently than we do." Jake didn't know what to say. He had never been in a war room before, and now he was expected to provide valuable input. He was just a soldier, no strategist, no diplomat. But he understood one thing: the Xylar Empire was failing, and if they didn't change their approach, they would be destroyed. But could he really help? "I don't know if I can be much help," Jake said, his voice uncertain. "I've never fought a war like this. I've fought battles, sure, but this is different." Alara's eyes softened, and she stepped closer to him. "You are more capable than you realize, Jake. You know what it means to fight for survival. You understand how to think outside the box. That is why I chose you." Jake looked into her eyes. There was no deceit in her gaze, no manipulation. She truly believed in him, and for the first time, Jake felt a glimmer of hope. Maybe he could make a difference. Maybe they could work together. The officers continued to argue over tactics, their voices growing louder. Jake had to admit, he didn't understand most of what they were saying. Their language was filled with terms he had never heard before. But there was one thing that stood out to him: they were focusing too much on force. They were thinking too much like soldiers, and not enough like survivors. As the conversation reached a boiling point, Jake stepped forward, surprising everyone in the room. "What if you stop fighting for a moment?" he said, his voice cutting through the tension. "What if you stop focusing on military victories and start thinking about peace?" The room fell silent. Alara turned to him, a look of curiosity on her face. "Peace?" One of the officers sneered. "We are at war. Human, we cannot afford peace." Jake shook his head. "You've been fighting for years, and what has it gotten you? More destruction, more lives lost. The longer this war goes on, the weaker you become. You need to find another way. You need to stop fighting and start negotiating." There was a long silence. The officers exchanged looks, some shaking their heads in disbelief. Alara, however, was silent for a moment, her eyes narrowing in thought. "You're right," she said slowly. "We cannot win this war with force alone. We need to find another way. But who will we negotiate with? We've made too many enemies. How can we possibly reach peace?" Jake's heart raced. He had no answers, no grand plan. But he knew one thing for sure: if the Xylars didn't change their approach, They will lose everything. You start by showing your enemies that you're willing to change. You show them that you're not just conquerors or survivors. You're not just taking. You're offering something in return. Peace, security, a future. You don't have to fight to survive. You just need to prove that you can coexist. Alara stared at him, her expression unreadable. For a moment, Jake thought she might reject his idea. But then she spoke. Coexist, she murmured. It's an idea we have forgotten. My people have been at war for so long that we've forgotten what it means to coexist, to live alongside others without fighting. But maybe that's the answer. Jake nodded, though he still wasn't sure if this would work. Negotiating peace with the galaxy's enemies was no small task, but it was better than continuing to destroy everything in sight. Alara turned to her officers, her voice firm. Prepare a message for the other empires. We will offer peace. We will seek negotiations. The officers seemed hesitant, but they didn't argue. They began to work quickly, sending out messages across the galaxy. Alara turned back to Jake, her eyes softening once again. You have given me something to think about, she said. Maybe this is the way forward. Maybe we can save my people after all. Jake didn't know if this was the right path, but he had made a choice. He had chosen to help the Xylers, to help Alara. Whether or not they succeeded, he had no idea. But he wasn't going to give up, not yet. The weeks that followed were filled with tension. Alara had put Jake's plan into motion, sending peace messages across the galaxy, reaching out to the other empires that had long been enemies of the Xyler. Jake had never imagined he would be part of something like this, negotiating peace instead of fighting battles. But here he was, standing beside the Xyler Queen, trying to make the impossible happen. Alara had changed in many ways since that day. She was no longer the cold and ruthless leader that Jake had first met. Now, she was more focused, determined, and, in a way, vulnerable. She had put her trust in him, and Jake couldn't help but feel the weight of that responsibility. Despite their efforts, the response from the other empires had been mixed. Some were open to the idea of peace, but others were still suspicious, unwilling to let go of the years of hatred and mistrust. The war had been long and brutal, and old wounds ran deep. Peace wasn't something that could be achieved overnight, but Jake believed it was possible. He had to. One afternoon, as Jake was walking through the ship's corridors, Alara summoned him to her quarters. When he arrived, she was standing by a large window, gazing out at the stars. She didn't turn to look at him as he entered, but he could feel the tension in the air. Jake, she said quietly, her voice filled with uncertainty. The response from the other empires. It's not what I hoped for. Jake stepped closer, his heart racing. He had known things wouldn't be easy, but hearing it from her made the situation feel even more real. What do you mean? He asked, his voice steady but concerned. Some of them are willing to talk, but others, she paused, turning to face him, others are preparing for war. They don't believe in peace. They think I'm weak for even considering it, and now they're planning to attack. Jake felt a knot tighten in his stomach. This wasn't what he had hoped for either. He had believed in the idea of peace, but now it seemed like they were running out of time. The war was still raging, and there were no guarantees that their efforts would succeed. What do we do now? Jake asked. If they're preparing for war, we'll be ready for it, right? Alara shook her head, her expression filled with frustration. No, I don't want more bloodshed. I don't want to fight. But what if they force my hand? What if they push me too far? I've already lost so much. Jake could see the pain in her eyes, the weight of the decision she had to make. He knew what she was going through. He had faced similar struggles in his own battles. The choice to fight, to end lives, was never easy, but sometimes it was the only option. We can't just give up, Jake said firmly. We've come this far. We can't let them win by forcing us into war. We have to show them that we mean it, that peace is worth fighting for. Alara looked at him, her eyes softening. I know, but what if it's not enough? What if they don't believe me? Jake stepped closer, his resolve stronger than ever. We have to give them reason to believe. We can't just sit back and let them take everything from us. We have to stand strong. For a moment, there was silence. Then Alara spoke, her voice filled with determination. You're right, we will stand strong. But we need to show them that we can fight for peace. We need to make them see that this is the only way. Jake nodded, feeling a surge of hope. They weren't giving up. They were going to do whatever it took to secure peace, even if it meant standing against those who would rather see the war continue. It was a difficult path, but it was the only path forward. Later that evening, Alara called a meeting with her generals and the officers on her ship. Jake sat at the table, watching as the tension in the room grew. The officers were divided, some still loyal to the idea of fighting, while others were beginning to see the value in Alara's vision of peace. Jake could feel the weight of the decision they were about to make. We cannot afford to lose any more ground, one of the generals said, his voice harsh. We've already been pushed to the brink. If we don't fight back now, we will be destroyed. Peace is a dream, and dreams don't win wars. Alara didn't flinch at his words. I understand your concerns, she said, her voice calm but firm. But this war has already cost us too much. I will not lead my people into another battle for power. We must find another way. Jake could see the tension in the room. The officers were divided, and it seemed like no one could agree on how to proceed. The pressure was mounting, and the weight of the decision felt heavier than ever. I know this isn't easy, Jake said, standing up, but we can't just keep fighting. We have to try something different. We have to show the galaxy that we're not just conquerors, we're survivors. We've lost enough. This war can't be the end of us. The room was silent as everyone turned to look at him. Alara met his gaze, her eyes filled with gratitude. She had placed her trust in him, and now she needed him more than ever. We will try one last time, Alara said, her voice steady. We will offer peace, and we will give them everything we have. But if they refuse, we will fight with everything we have left. The choice is theirs. Jake felt a surge of hope. It wasn't over yet. They still had a chance, and as long as they fought for peace, there was still hope for the future. The next day, the peace offer was sent out again, this time with even more urgency. Alara and Jake waited, watching as the messages traveled across the galaxy. They couldn't change what had happened in the past, but they could shape the future. They could still make a difference. As the hours passed, the tension in the room was unbearable. Would the other empires respond with peace, or would they choose to continue the war? No one knew, but they couldn't stop now. They had come too far. Just as they were about to lose hope, a message came through. It was a reply from one of the largest empires in the galaxy, the Trezin Coalition. Alara's hands trembled as she opened it, her heart racing. The message was short, but it was enough to make her breath catch. The Trezins had agreed to a meeting. They were willing to talk. We have a chance, Alara said, her voice filled with a mix of relief and disbelief. Jake smiled, the weight on his shoulders lifting for the first time in days. It's not over yet, he said, but this is the beginning of something new. The atmosphere in the war room was tense. Alara stood at the head of the table, her fingers resting lightly on the edge of the map display. Her gaze was fixed on the glowing stars above, but her mind was far away. Jake stood beside her, his thoughts swirling. The message they had been waiting for had finally arrived, but now the real challenge was about to begin. The Trezin Coalition had agreed to meet, but would they truly come to the table for peace? Jake could feel the weight of the moment. They were so close, yet still so far from success. He had seen peace talks break down before, had been part of operations where diplomacy had failed, but this time felt different. This time, it wasn't just about military might or political pressure, it was about survival. Both the Xylar Empire and the Trezin Coalition were at a crossroads. Neither side could afford more war, but pride and history made it difficult to trust the other. Alara turned to Jake, her expression calm but filled with quiet determination. This is it. The meeting will take place tomorrow. We have one chance to show them we are serious. Jake nodded. And what do you expect from them? Do you think they'll agree to peace? Alara's lips tightened into a faint smile. I don't know. But I do know one thing: we will fight for this peace. We will show them that we are willing to put everything on the line. Jake knew she wasn't just talking about the meeting tomorrow. She was talking about everything: the future of her people, the future of the Xylar Empire, and the future of every species involved in this war. It was a fight that went beyond weapons. It was a fight for understanding, for hope, and for survival. The next day, Jake found himself standing in front of a large, round table in the heart of the Xylar flagship. The meeting was set to take place in a neutral space station, just outside the borders of both the Xylar and Trezzen territories. This space station had once been a symbol of cooperation between different species, but over the years, it had fallen into disuse. Today, it would become the stage for a final attempt at peace. Alara, Jake, and a small group of Xylar diplomats stood waiting in the conference room. Jake couldn't help but feel nervous. This wasn't like any mission he had been on before. There were no weapons, no explosions, no direct enemies, just the cold, silent air of diplomacy. As the doors opened, a delegation of Trezzen diplomats entered. The Trezzens were a proud species, their bodies covered in armor that seemed to reflect the light around them, giving them an almost otherworldly appearance. Their leader, Commander Xythar, walked in first, his eyes scanning the room with cautious suspicion. His gaze briefly met Jake's, then shifted to Alara. "Queen Alara," Xythar said in a low, gravelly voice, "you have summoned us to discuss peace. But make no mistake, this is not a simple matter. The Trezzen coalition does not easily trust its enemies." Alara didn't flinch. Her voice was firm and steady. "I understand your hesitation, Commander Xythar. I don't expect trust to come easily. But the truth is, both of our empires are on the brink. We cannot afford to keep fighting. The cost has been too high." Xythar remained silent for a moment, his eyes narrowing. "The Xylars have taken much from us. Your empire has spread its conquests across the galaxy, destroying countless worlds. Why should we believe that this is anything more than a trap?" Jake watched as Alara stood her ground. "The Xylar Empire is not what it once was. We have lost everything we fought for. Our people are dying, and I will not lead them to further destruction. I am offering peace, Commander, not deceit." Xythar looked at her with a mixture of disbelief and suspicion. "And what do you expect from us in return? Our people are still recovering from the damage you've done. How can we simply forget the past and move forward?" Jake stepped forward, his voice clear but respectful. "It's not about forgetting the past, Commander. It's about ensuring that there's a future to fight for. Peace doesn't mean that we ignore what has happened. It means we choose to move forward together, despite our differences. If we don't make this work, we'll only be giving our enemies the victory. We'll be condemning ourselves to endless war." Xythar turned his gaze to Jake, studying him for a long moment. "And what role do you play in all of this, human?" he asked. "You are not part of this galaxy's politics. Why are you here?" Jake met his gaze without hesitation. "I'm here because peace matters to everyone. I'm here because we've all lost too much, and if we don't try to make it work, there will be no one left to fight for." The tension in the room was thick, the weight of their words hanging heavily in the air. For a long moment, there was only silence. Then Xythar looked back at Alara. "This is your last chance, Queen Alara," he said. "The Trezzen coalition will not bow to threats. But if you truly seek peace, then we are willing to listen." Alara's voice was calm but strong. "I am not asking you to bow, Commander. I am asking you to consider a future without war. A future where our children don't grow up knowing nothing but conflict. I am asking you to fight for something greater than ourselves." Xythar's expression softened slightly, though the suspicion was still there. "If this is a trap, I will destroy you, Queen Alara. But if you are truly serious about peace, we will discuss it." Jake could see the shift in the room. The walls that had once been so rigid between them seemed to crack. Just a little. It wasn't much, but it was something. The Trezzens were listening. The Xylars had a chance. The negotiations began in earnest. The diplomats from both sides sat down, speaking about terms and conditions, about borders and resources, about how they could coexist. It wasn't easy. There were moments of tension, arguments over old wounds, and moments where it seemed like the talks might fall apart. But through it all, Jake couldn't help but notice the change in Alara. She wasn't just the queen of the Xylers anymore. She was a leader, someone who had learned the value of peace. Hours passed, and the room grew heavy with the weight of the decision they were all making. Finally, after what seemed like an eternity, Zether stood and turned to Alara. "This is not an agreement of trust," he said. "It is an agreement of survival. If this peace holds, we will prosper together. If it fails, then the war will continue." Alara nodded. "I accept that, but I will fight for this peace. I will ensure that it lasts." Jake stood by her side, feeling the weight of the moment. It wasn't over yet, but for the first time, he believed in the possibility of a future without war. As the meeting ended, and the diplomats began to depart, Alara turned to Jake with a quiet smile. "You were right," she said softly. "Peace is worth fighting for." Jake smiled back, his heart lighter than it had been in weeks. "We're not done yet, but we're closer than we've ever been." And with that, the first steps toward peace were taken, not just for the Xyler Empire, but for the entire galaxy.